This will not go away as long as Donald Trump is talking about it. And every time he's asked a question about it, he probably should say at this point, this case is closed. I said what I had to say. I have bigger priorities right now for the country. But he keeps saying that. I don't understand why people are so fascinated with this. And my now former supporters should really get over it. That's not going to satisfy them. No way.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've spoken to Joe Concha, a political commentator and author. We've spoken all about this Epstein drama and the fact that very staunch MAGA supporters want Donald Trump to release all the information the DOJ and the FBI have on these Epstein files, this Epstein client list. Trump and his team say that there is nothing there. We don't need to expose any of it, but they say that they do. So we speak all about that, whether Trump's hiding something. Elon Musk even used Grok, his AI tool on X, to get to the bottom of what the government could have if there's records of plane activity, who was on these Epstein planes, who went to Epstein Island, and whether that could lead to a little bit more information. So we get all into that today. So you can watch us every day on the Trump Report on Times Radio's YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. Joe Concha, political commentator and author, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a while, Maddie.
It has been a while for you and I, and we're going to get straight into the Epstein stuff. Now, I don't know about you, but I really thought this was going to die down in the last few days or last week, but it's really kicked off. I just want our audience and listeners to know kind of what's really been happening. Candace Owens calling it terminal cancer to the MAGA movement. Tucker Carlson upset that the government he voted for refused to take his questions. Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn, Laura Loomer, Marjorie Taylor Greene all calling for this to be released. Big MAGA personalities, not so much Candace Owens anymore, but upset that these Epstein files haven't really been released after the DOJ and the FBI ruled it a case closed. But do you see this blowing over for Donald Trump, or do you think it is a bit of a terminal cancer for the MAGA movement, as Candace Owens would say so?
Well, my colleague Britt Hume had a great observation, and that's that conspiracy theories rarely are actually true, and they almost never go away. In other words, here we are 60 years later or so, and we're still talking about if Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in his assassination of John F. Kennedy. So no one's ever going to be satisfied. And when you see these folks on the right, hard right, saying that, well, the list needs to be released. Well, if Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, the Attorney General Pam Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, and his deputy Dan Bongino say that no list exists, then you either believe that they're now part of the conspiracy as well and want to cover up for a monster like Jeffrey Epstein, or maybe a list just doesn't exist. I believe a Rolodex exists of Epstein's contacts. You have a Rolodex, I have a Rolodex. That doesn't mean that the people in that Rolodex necessarily engaged in pedophilia on Epstein Island. And Trump has made that point, that if you release everything, then implications are going to be made that folks were involved that were probably just a contact of Epstein, who was a very rich man and probably had a lot of business meetings that other than the horrible stuff. But to answer your question, Maddie, this will not go away as long as Donald Trump is talking about it. And every time he's asked a question about it, he probably should say at this point, this case is closed. I said what I had to say. I have bigger priorities right now for the country. But he keeps saying that. I don't understand why people are so fascinated with this. And my now former supporters should really get over it. That's not going to satisfy them. No way.
You're absolutely right. It is a bit of a damned if he does, damned if he doesn't situation. And you're right. Just because you're named as either someone who took a business meeting or even a friend of Epstein's doesn't mean that you're involved in anything incriminating. But as Rolling Stone, Joe, is reporting that Trump said that they won't shut the F up about it, referring to some of his MAGA base. He also said, let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking about our incredible and unprecedented success, because I don't want their support anyway. Now, we see, of course, Donald Trump remaining strong in the public eye, but do you think this is worrying the president?
I think it's frustrating the president because he sees, say, the attack on Iran and eliminating or at least damaging their nuclear capabilities for a long time, and that's a big success. He sees that horrible tragedy in Texas where young girls were swept away by this horrible flood that just came out of nowhere. And 2 days after that happens, he's still answering questions about Jeffrey Epstein instead of obviously a much more important and tragic event. I think he sees the economy doing better, stock market doing better, overall winning a lot in the Supreme Court, sees these successes, wants to talk about those. Instead, it seems that the questioners are still focused on that at this point. So, yeah, he's definitely frustrated. But I think in the end, when you look at the polls, Donald Trump is now polling higher than any Republican president in polling history. That means higher than Ronald Reagan. So while the loudest voices on the right that have platforms like podcasts and a large social media presence are upset about Epstein, for the most part, the people that voted for him will stick with him because of the other things that he's been successful with.
Trump calling his big supporters the ones calling for the release of these Epstein files. He called them weaklings, but I wonder, does that mean that Donald Trump's kind of changed his tune in a day? Because, Joe, on Tuesday, he literally said that Pam Bondi should release whatever she thinks is credible.
Right. And Pam Bondi is saying, well, there's nothing really credible left at this point. But we just don't know what we don't know. I think in the end, if we just saw some evidence that a list exists, and we've been talking about this for many, many years. And my point, and I keep going back to this question, Maddie, and it's this. If a list existed that had the most powerful politicians, Hollywood celebrities on it that engaged in pedophilia at the service of Jeffrey Epstein on Epstein Island, it would have been weaponized by now. In other words, if Donald Trump is on that list, like so many on the left are saying, like, well, he's just trying to cover up the fact that he's on that list, even though it's odd that Trump would then, before he got back into office, said, well, we're going to release everything, knowing he was on the list. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But in the end, it would have been weaponized by Barack Obama and Joe Biden in 2016 when Donald Trump looked like he could be going into the Oval Office as president of the United States. They would have released it then to destroy him. And Republicans, if they knew there were some prominent Democrats on there and they had access to this, would have been released also. So somebody would have done something with the list at this point, and no one has, because maybe it just doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point because maybe the Republicans didn't release it because, maybe Trump's on it, or maybe some high-profile Republicans or members of society are on it. But then on the other side, maybe the Democrats didn't release it because perhaps Clinton was on it.
Yeah.
You never know. It's just kind of one of those things where I think people are saying that we should just see it in general to see. We'll see whatever information is available, Joe. So I wonder, is it worth getting a special counsel appointed to this?
Well, that's the thing. Republicans are in power here in the United States, not just as president with Donald Trump, but they control the Senate. They control the House. And in order to get a special counsel, the Attorney General would have to recuse herself, and then a special counsel would be assigned. This happened in 2017 when Trump's Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, recused himself from the Russia investigation, and then we had a special counsel that ate up 3 years of the Trump presidency that concluded that Trump didn't have any collusion with Russia. So I doubt that Pam Bondi is going to say, yep, let's do that all over again. I'll step aside. Let's have the special counsel. As long as she stays firm, and as long as Republicans in the House and Senate stay firm, and they will, as we've seen, Donald Trump wants whatever Donald Trump wants, Donald Trump gets, as far as the big, beautiful bill, for example. I don't see that happening because Republicans, particularly the Attorney General, would have to agree to it.
And the special counsel investigation into Hunter Biden, that kicked off in 2018, and that was only wrapped up last year. So you're right, these things can take a long time and they're incredibly expensive. But Joe, Epstein's lawyer, David Schoen, I think that's how you say his name, he said he asked Epstein before he died if he had any information on President Trump. Epstein allegedly said no to him. Now, that's, of course, a very credible source, but this is the same lawyer who did represent Donald Trump in his second impeachment trial. So I wonder, do people look at that and think that's a credible source from Epstein's former lawyer to say, no, I have a verbal assurance that Donald Trump was not named?
I could answer that with two answers. One, I know David Schoen. He works with me over at Fox. I've always seen him to be sober and very credible all of that said, when a lawyer says something and that lawyer represents somebody, usually people just kind of roll their eyes and say, yeah, whatever. He's a lawyer. He's supposed to say that. He's making an argument on behalf of his client, even though his client is now dead. So, yeah, I don't think that moves the needle very much. You either absolutely believe that there is a list and the Trump administration is suppressing it, or you believe, like I do, that there is not a list, just a Rolodex with names on it that have nothing to do with pedophilia.
Joe, Elon Musk, obviously, him and Donald Trump had this very public fallout last month. One of the big takeaways, and of course, Musk, he did come out and say he regretted taking to his keyboard warrior state. But he did say about Donald Trump, he said, time to drop the really big bomb. Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Now, of course, he said this in a state of lashing out against his former best friend. But would it be stupid to ignore that?
No, I don't think it would be stupid to ignore that, Maddie, because Elon Musk, for many, many weeks, literally lived at Mar-a-Lago. He and Trump could be seen together everywhere. All of that said, I think that Musk, we've seen very inconsistent things from him in being this keyboard warrior. On one hand, he has been effusive in his praise of Donald Trump ever since he endorsed him about a year ago. And then obviously after Trump won, as I mentioned, living at Mar-a-Lago, then dropping everything, multi-billion-dollar companies, successful companies like Tesla, SpaceX, to go work for the Trump administration in running Doge. And that brought a lot of heat on Elon Musk, and he lost a lot of money. And I think that probably is in his craw at this point, that he made all these sacrifices and doesn't see the cuts that he had recommended. Now, those cuts will be coming in other bills, but Musk seems impatient that they haven't happened already. So then he lashes out at Trump and makes all these accusations, including that Trump is on the Epstein list. He said that a couple months ago, but then he retracted and said, no, I didn't mean that. I apologize. I'm sorry. So which Elon Musk are we getting? And if he's been consistent, that would be one thing. But he's been wildly inconsistent on social media, which is probably the worst thing to happen to human beings that are in the public eye, because they share whatever feeling they're having at any given moment and it goes out to millions of people. Maybe they don't think these things through very well. And I think when Elon Musk thinks things through, that's when he ends up apologizing. So I don't know what to think, Maddie.
I know, and he is prolific. I mean, he replies to absolutely everything, Joe. But I want to read this out, and bear with me because this is a bit long for our viewers and our listeners, but this is interesting. Elon Musk, he is clearly so determined to expose if the government has anything on them towards the Epstein files, whether Donald Trump's involved. But he basically asked Grok, his AI tool, if there is any electronic records in any government or commercial computers recording who travelled on Jeffrey Epstein's plane to the US Virgin Islands. Grok said yes, electronic records likely exist. The FAA databases hold 2,000 digital flight logs for Epstein's jets from 98 to 2020. Elon Musk said, would that mean that the government right now, as we speak, knows the names and ages of all of those who travelled on Epstein's planes? Grok said, yes, the DOJ and the FAA hold extensive passenger manifests and flight logs from Epstein's jets, including names from 91 to 2020. Elon asked if there were over 250 girls exploited. Grok said, as of July 2025, the memo indicates that there are 1,000 victims. Elon said over 1,000 confirmed young victims is shockingly large and a tragic number. In order for the government to confirm that the girls were victimized, they would have to name or at least describe who raped them. This would necessarily mean that the government must have a list of rapists, aka the Epstein client list, in their possession right effing now. So I want to get your reaction to that, because it is an interesting point. Basically, what Elon Musk is saying is that the FAA or the government at least has a list of whoever traveled on Jeffrey Epstein's plane.
Yeah, I saw that word in there, likely has a list. You know, that's not definitive, and it's the AI thing. It's not somebody who works in government that has access to any files that may exist. So it's based on news reports. That's how AI works, right? It grabs information from all over the internet and then comes to a conclusion. So yeah, again, and you know, it's horrible what happened. I have a daughter, 11 years old. I couldn't even imagine, and some of these girls weren't too much older than that, to be manipulated the way they were, and then the things that happened on Epstein's properties. Again, no one is defending that, and Epstein was arrested for that. That's why he literally committed suicide in jail. I know that some people will say that he was killed, and we don't have absolute definitive knowledge around that, even though that would be one heck of a cover-up. But in the end, what the government knows is what they know. And there are things on the outside that we simply do not know. But it is interesting that Elon Musk is going at this as hard as he has. But again, just because you're on Epstein's plane doesn't mean you engaged in this behavior. I mean, there are junkets that go on at very nice places of residence of rich people all the time. But that doesn't mean that you were involved in that. So I don't know where you draw the line in terms of, okay, you may have gone there, I guess, but does that automatically mean that you engage in this horrible behavior where, in the case of Trump, there's never been an allegation against him. There have been many allegations against him that he engaged in that kind of behavior before. So I just don't know what I don't know.
Do you think that his constituents, whether they're diehard MAGA or just voters of Trump, right-wing voters, middle ground Americans, lower income Americans, do you think they won't feel complete trust in Trump until there is a proper, I guess, exposure of what was in these files information?
Though they won't have complete trust in Trump probably as it regards this issue. But then again, do I think they're going to leave Trump, or in this case, since he can't run again, leave a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio if they end up being the Republican nominee? No, I don't. Because I look at the alternative. I look at the Democratic Party right now. Quinnipiac University just came out with a poll that they are at 19% approval, meaning that less than 1 in 5 people approve of what the Democratic Party is doing right now. So I don't think that any voters are really lost here because, well, you know, the other date that you can go on is the Democratic Party, and they have completely gone off the deep end with many, many issues that do not align with the American people. Clearly, we saw that during the 2024 elections. So, yeah, I think in the end they'll be upset, perhaps, this hardcore group of people, and I don't think it's very large, about the Epstein files, but in the end, they'll look at all the other things that Trump and the Republicans are doing and saying, okay, well, I don't like that. Overall, I'll take the Republicans and what they're doing on the economy and the border and foreign policy well over the Democrats, which under 4 years of Joe Biden obviously did not go well.
Just a final question, Joe. We say that Americans would rather this Trump over the alternative, but do you have any thoughts on who you think the Democrats will put up for nomination or at least start grooming into that position?
I think it's as crazy as this may have sounded a couple of years ago. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a former bartender, yes, of just 7, 8 years ago, and that's fine. I bartended. I'm not disparaging that. But
I'm a former bartender 8 years ago.
Really? I could see you in like an Irish kind of pub type of place, running the show. It's very interesting.
I do.
Yes, we'll have to talk about that offline. But no, overall, it's just amazing where she was and where she is projected to go. And the energy of the Democratic Party is behind the socialist wing of the party. We see it in New York City. Zoran Mamdani, who literally pushes communist ideas on the economy, has said some pretty anti-Semitic things in the past. He probably will be the next mayor of New York. So they're going to see that as a roadmap and say, all right, AOC, that's where the young energy is. She's great on social media. Good enough. So I could see it being like an AOC, J.D. Vance type of matchup, which you couldn't find 2 more different people running for president. But that's how I see this thing going as it stands right now. But then again, I never saw Donald Trump coming in 2015. So who the hell knows, Maddie?
Joe Concha, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, bartender. I'll have 2 more. Thank you.